Well, brothers and sisters, welcome back. This is the In My Grow Show, the podcast dedicated to taking the mystery out of cannabis. I'm Alex Robles. So I want to thank you guys for taking the time to hang out with me again today. As always, I need to thank DJ Monster Drop. Shoot, I might as well just say he's one of the producers. Brother, how you doing today? So I was in my little veg area a couple days ago. Remember how last time I said I was sprouting seeds? Well, most of them came up. All the ones I really wanted came up. But, so I was in there, and I realized. So I'm in there, I'm taking a look at these little sprouting seedlings, and they're like really long. You know, like maybe 3 inches to the first set of leaves, like super long. I guess it's time to change the T5 bulb that's in there. It's, you know, it must have been in there for over a year. I think next time I'll date the bulb. You know, write the date on it, not like take it out for drinks. Different kind of date. So yeah, that's basically why those seedlings stretch, was because of the light's not strong enough. They're stretching for the light. And what else, man? Okay, so last time I was talking about beta-caryophyllene, and I got all caught up in the sciencey part of it. What I don't think I mentioned about why I like beta-caryophyllene so much is that beta-caryophyllene is really good if you're with someone, or you yourself. If you've smoked too much cannabis, you've gotten just way too high. It helps to bring down the effects of THC. It's not going to totally sober you up, but it is going to shave off that super high anxiety feeling. At least that's what I've noticed. So what will usually happen is, you know, if someone's gotten way too high at my house, I have them suck on 1 or 2 peppercorns, and it seems to help. I've also noticed that there's an essential oil out there. This essential oil company named doTERRA, I don't know how to pronounce it. Ask Uncle Google, he'll tell you. But they make, I believe it's called the beta-caryophyllene essential oil. My wife has it. I asked her to order it. I don't know if it's come in yet. But when it does, I'm going to talk about it again. So yeah, that's why I like beta-caryophyllene, because it takes down the effects of THC when you smoke it. Now I say when you smoke it because I don't know if it's going to have the same effect if you've taken edibles, because THC turns into something way different when you eat it, when it has to go through your liver. See, THC, when it goes through your liver changes it into 11-hydroxy-THC, which is a lot more psychedelic than the Delta 9 THC that we get when we smoke it through our lungs, when we get it into our blood. When we get it into our bloodstream through our lungs. So yeah, I don't know if the beta-caryophyllene acts the same way with edibles, but you know, try it out, can't hurt. So I'm excited about today's show because, you know, I've been talking a lot lately about California's new cannabis regulations. There's a lot of them. There's not only a lot of them, they're temporary, so it's all going to change. On top of that, they're super confusing. There's a lot of people out here who are just mad about the way it's being put together and hobbled together, it seems like. So I asked Ryan Kocot to come on the show, you know, and explain a little bit. And I say a little bit because there are so many different things that we could talk about when we talk about new regulations in cannabis in California. He's going to come on the show and answer some questions about getting a cannabis business license out here in California. He's also going to talk about a cannabis DUI, because I've been really curious, you know, because I know there are a lot of differences between an alcohol and a cannabis DUI, but Ryan's going to help put it into sharper focus for us. So I'm going to take a short break, and when I come back, I'm going to have Ryan on the phone with us.
Brothers and sisters, I'm excited to have Mr. Ryan Kocot on the phone with me today. Ryan's a lawyer, and he's going to help hopefully answer some of the questions we have about DUIs and some cannabis business licensing. Ryan, brother, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm living the dream, man. Thank you. So let's get some information about you, Ryan. Where do you practice law at? What's the name of your law firm?
Sure. So my office is in Sacramento, California, Northern California. And it's just based on my name. It's this law office of Ryan T. Kocot. Mainly started off doing criminal defense. I would say about 60% of what I do right now is criminal defense, most of which is DUI defense. My experience from doing marijuana DUIs as well as other marijuana-related charges kind of segued me into working with cannabis businesses as well.
Wow. Oh, cool. Far out, man. Well, you're the guy I want to talk to then. So,
perfect.
Yeah. So let's get started with the DUIs then. Okay, so I'm wondering, what does cannabis intoxication look like in the eyes of the law? I mean, how do they measure that?
Well, that's kind of the million-dollar question. So everybody knows with alcohol DUIs that we have that per se limit of at or above a 0.08% alcohol, okay? The problem is that the science just is not there yet to establish that same kind of per se limit to say that you are under the influence at this amount of THC in your system. So in a lot of ways, we don't know what cannabis intoxication looks like because it's just insufficiently studied for any number of reasons, mainly being that, it's still illegal federally. So at this point in time, there are states that do have a per se limit of 2.5 nanograms and 5 nanograms, but California does not have that. So at this point in time, it's very difficult, unless you have a situation where someone is driving all over the road or, gets into an accident or something like that. It's very difficult for the district attorney to actually prove marijuana DUIs for that exact reason, by not having that per se limit.
Wow. So then let's say a police officer pulls me over. I've got cannabis in my vehicle. I'm not intoxicated, but I've got cannabis in my vehicle. My vehicle obviously smells. The officer thinks, he asked me to do a roadside test. Now, if there's no way for him to, how is he going to recognize intoxication then? Is it like special training? Do they, what signs are they looking for then?
Well, that's a pretty loaded question. We'll kind of break it down in parts here. The first thing I will say is that it was no coincidence or mistake that the California legislature, or not the legislature, but the people writing the regulations, it's no mistake whatsoever that they banned any cannabis usage in a car. To go to your question, the way an officer typically justifies a DUI detention to do the investigation is any number of things. The biggest one is the smell of marijuana. So obviously, if California had a situation where a passenger or something like that, could smoke in the car now that it is recreationally or adult use legal, that's obviously cutting into the officer's ability to justify starting a DUI investigation by virtue of smelling marijuana if it's legal to do so. Like I said, there's no coincidence that they've outlawed that. But to answer some of your other questions, the problem is that we have field sobriety tests. And these field sobriety tests are, they're supposed to be standardized in the sense that they're offered and administered in a standardized fashion. But the problem is that those field sobriety tests have been studied for alcohol intoxication. I was just recently actually at a California Cannabis Industry Association meeting, and one of the assembly members actually pointed out that they're coming up with field sobriety tests specific to marijuana intoxication. The reality is we have what are called drug recognition evaluations at this point, which take into consideration some of the differences between alcohol intoxication and drug intoxication. But marijuana is such a unique substance that it really needs its own set of tests to truly and scientifically determine whether or not someone is actually under the influence when they're driving.
Okay, so then in a roadside situation, it's basically up to the officer making this, he's coming to this conclusion that you're intoxicated under cannabis and therefore you're going to get arrested?
Yeah, so I mean, whether it be alcohol or cannabis, basically what the officer does is they pull you over, obviously. At that point in time, if they pulled you over for weeding or lane straddling, then they might have some indication that you're under the influence of something. But in the situation where you're just expired for like expired registration tags or something like that, the officer uses what are called objective signs of intoxication to justify starting that DUI investigation. And those are red and watery eyes, slurred speech, unsteady gait, things like that. And in the context of marijuana, the smell of marijuana, if it's alcohol, the smell of alcohol coming from a person. And once they have what's called reasonable suspicion that you could be driving under the influence, that's what justifies being able to begin a DUI investigation. And by a DUI investigation, I mean the field sobriety test. It's the field sobriety test that they use to establish probable cause to then arrest you and make you submit to a chemical test, which in the context of a marijuana DUI would be a blood test.
Okay, so if I refuse that roadside field sobriety test, does that give them cause enough to throw me in the back of their vehicle and away we go with an arrest investigation?
So that's actually a scenario that happens pretty frequently. What happens sometimes is some police agencies just are not sufficiently trained to conduct DUI investigations, so they do what's called a turnover, and they turn it over to an agency like California Highway Patrol, who is in fact trained enough to do these investigations. Sometimes, though, they're not able to get a hold of someone from CHP, and you do see arrests even just based off of the objective signs of intoxication without field sobriety tests. It's based on my experience with the amount of cases that I've handled as far as DUI cases, I would pretty confidently say that an officer in a lot of circumstances can arrest someone even without the field sobriety test. The reality is this: you have zero obligation whatsoever to answer any of the questions that they ask you or to perform any of those field sobriety tests, including the breath test in the context of an alcohol DUI that's administered prior to being arrested. But you see, so you have that happen all the time as far as people just saying, no, I'm not doing any of this, and people still get arrested. It's been challenged, typically in a situation where someone is arrested without FSTs as far as the field sobriety test, you need to have a situation where you can put it in front of the judge and show the judge that there's some contradiction on the dashboard cam per se, compared to what's actually in the report. So sometimes, not to be, too cynical, sometimes I get the impression that these DUI reports that are written are kind of copy and paste. And
sure.
Once in a while you'll catch a report where they're kind of just filling in the blanks from prior reports, but then you watch the video and this person is walking straight as an arrow. There's no unsteady gait.
Okay.
Or, they say that the speech is slurred, but you have the video in the audio of your client speaking with the officer and it's not slurred. So I guess it just kind of depends on the specific facts of each case, but in most circumstances, experience would tell you that an officer can generally justify an arrest in court based only off of objective signs of intoxication.
Wow. So now would you say best practices for me, once the officer says, I want to give you a field sobriety test and I refuse, from there I should just keep my mouth shut?
Right. So in most circumstances, I think the best advice to give anybody is to not answer any of the questions that they ask you prior to asking you to do the FSTs, and to not do the FSTs. But to be very clear about something, you have to distinguish between, especially more so in the context of an alcohol DUI, and actually also in the context of a cannabis DUI. All the field sobriety tests that they administer prior to you being arrested is completely optional. After you're arrested, though, you can face administrative penalties through the DMV if you refuse to do the chemical test that they have you do back at the station, which can be either a blood or breath test. A corollary to that, though, is that the DMV, let me back up actually a little bit. When you're charged with a DUI, especially with an alcohol DUI, you're facing two actions at once. You're facing an administrative action from the DMV, in addition to criminal charges from the criminal court, from the DA's office. And theoretically, and not even theoretically, this happens all the time, you can have your case dismissed in criminal court and still have your license suspended at DMV if you lose your DMV hearing. What's kind of interesting, though, is that DMV has not caught up because the science just isn't there for cannabis. There's actually, if it's a straight cannabis DUI, there's no administrative action taken by DMV. They only deal with alcohol DUIs.
So right now, because if I'm understanding it right, so if someone gets arrested for an alcohol DUI, there's a short window where they can contest their license being taken away, but they don't even have that on the radar at the DMV for cannabis. Is that right?
Right. So you have 10 days from the date you're arrested to request a DMV hearing. If you do not request a DMV hearing within 10 days of your arrest, they'll automatically suspend your license within 30 days. Where things get a little confusing, though, is that there's, like I said, there's two actions. So you don't face any administrative suspension with a marijuana DUI, but if you're convicted of a first cannabis DUI in court, your license will be suspended. So you got to beat both to have a clean sweep of, not having your license suspended. And when I say beat, if you get a first marijuana DUI reduced to a wet reckless does not.
What is it called? It's called a wet reckless?
Yeah, I know. It's kind of a legal fiction is what you would call it. Even in the context of marijuana DUIs, they still give wet recklesses, which makes zero sense.
Oh, okay.
But, it's advantageous for that exact reason. You're avoiding having to, have any license suspension. And what's even more counterintuitive is that we have 4 pilot counties in California which, after being convicted of a first DUI, require the installation of an ignition interlock device. The IID, basically the breathalyzer you blow in, you have to blow in to start the car, kind of like if anybody's ever seen 4-year-old version. Same kind of deal. Right. Just be able to actually start it. What's counterintuitive that if you can get convicted of a straight marijuana DUI, they're actually still requiring people to do the ignition interlock device, even though alcohol was not involved whatsoever. So,
so even if you get that, I'm sorry. So even if you get that device for a cannabis DUI, you're still going to start your car because it's only made for alcohol, right?
Right. No, and that's absolutely true. But you're paying $75 a month for it to be in your car and whatever it costs to install it. So it's just. And similar to a wet reckless not, triggering a license suspension through the court, if you get a wet reckless, you avoid the requirement of the ignition interlock device as well.
Wow. Okay. Well,
it's a cluster. I mean, there's a lot. I think people make the mistake of thinking DUIs are simple. There's a ton going on with them. So you got to definitely know how to play the game, I guess.
Yeah, so the takeaway I'm getting is if I draw a cannabis DUI, just fight it. Call my buddy Ryan Kocot and fight it.
In most circumstances, I'll give you a perfect example, or not even a specific example. I think where people think themselves with cannabis DUIs is 2 things. First of all, the driving pattern. Like I said to you before, if you're leaving all over the road and, hitting cars or coming close to hitting cars, you have a harder time telling a jury this person is not impaired within the meaning of the law. The second thing is statements that are made. Sometimes it can help, sometimes it can hurt, because obviously if someone smokes every day and they hadn't smoked for about 2 hours, and when they did smoke 2 hours prior, it was only like a bowl of weed, whatever the case may be, we all know that person's not going to be intoxicated, okay? But what hurts people sometimes is if they've smoked recently and they admit to that. I think in most circumstances, it goes back to what I said earlier. You have zero obligation to answer any of those questions, and I think in most circumstances, it's to your advantage to just not answer any of the questions.
Wow. Well, all right. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the safest way to look at it.
Yeah, just keep your mouth shut, I guess, and you're gonna need a lawyer anyway, so might as well just wait for your lawyer.
Right. Yeah. No. It's a lot easier from my perspective as far as defending against these DUIs to not have to explain things. I would rather have essentially just work with a blood sample, a number, and kind of go from there. Because the reality is, and the DA knows this as well as anybody else does, the science does not establish a certain number as rendering someone under the influence within the meaning of the law. And to be clear, under the influence, under the code section is defined as whether or not that person can drive with the caution of a sober person in similar circumstances. So if you have a situation where someone's pulled over for a routine traffic stop, they say they run a stop sign or tags, like I said before, so there's no bad driving, and you have a marginal amount of marijuana in the system, that's tough to prove because there's no science to say that this number correlates to impairment when it comes to cannabis.
Wow.
So they are, to your point, yeah, I mean, I think most people should seriously consider fighting a marijuana DUI.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, you hear that, everybody? Fight it. Don't answer questions. So, Ryan, let's change. Yeah, I want to change speeds a little bit and talk a little bit about licensing for a cannabis business here in California, because we just got legal recreational cannabis, and everyone's hearing this, it's another green rush, but the realities are really a lot different than what the funny papers make it out to be.
Right.
So my first question is, when we first got Prop 64 here in California, when they were first putting out the literature for it, there was a residence clause in it. You had to be a resident for at least 5 years in the state in order to apply for a business license. Is that true?
Yeah, you know what's so interesting is that there's a ton of pushback right now around a similar issue as far as the size of cultivation grows and whatnot. And I think the initial concern of Prop 64 is to make sure this didn't get too big too quick, to push out small farmers and all that kind of stuff. So to your immediate question, yes, there was a residency requirement that no longer exists now. I think it was initially in place for that concern. You know, the ultimate concern is we don't want to push the little guy out, by allowing a ton of out-of-state money to come into the state. But I think there was enough pushback on that provision during the comment period that they axed it.
Wow, so that anyone from out of state can just pick up where they're at and move right in if they've got the money, just start their own business, huh? Wow.
Well, I guess I should back up for a second. I think what people need to realize is that the emergency regulations that were passed on December 7th as far as for the state are still fluid, okay? So at the end at that same meeting I read referenced earlier for the CCIA, Lori Ajax was there from the BCC, who was the head of it. And basically what's going to happen is they're going to release a more updated version of those regulations at the end of spring. And then they're going to do another 45-day period of comment as far as to let the public come out and voice their concerns about the newest, regulations that come out. And actually, if there's enough changes based on those comments, they're going to do another 45-day period. So my point being is that in any discussion of this stuff, realize that the state regulations are fluid, and by virtue of that, the local regulations are fluid, because the reality is that the locals are looking to the state as a starting ground as far as what to do with their regulations, which is why I think that's why you're seeing a lot of bans across the state, because the locals know that these are not the final regulations. So why are they going to, put out their own regulations to only have the state come in and change things and have to start from scratch? Because ultimately, the locals can have a more restrictive ordinance concerning whatever activity, whatever cannabis activity. They can't have anything looser than that, but they can have it something restrictive to the point of a ban. But if they can't have something that conflicts with the state. So I think how some of local government is looking at it, let's see what the state does first before we waste our time with regulations that are probably going to change.
Wow, I've never heard it explained that way, because it makes sense, because there is a lot of confusion across a lot of the industry as far as local access, because local municipalities are just as confused, and everyone's asking them for guidance, and they have none because, they have no guidance from the state, I guess.
Well, the state is confused too. I was watching. There's a webinar on the CCIA. They're just doing the best they can, but the head of the BCC, the CDFA, and the Department of Public Health, everybody's working through it, because there's even certain questions that were asked during the Q&A portion of that were unable to be answered, because the reality is that we're still in the infancy of these regulations, so you have to be able to adapt to changes as you go. But even the head honchos of these departments don't have all the answers, because it's impossible to have all the answers. So, and I think that's a really important thing to remember as far as calculating your risk if you're looking to get into this industry. I still think there's a very, I'm not trying to dissuade people from getting into the industry, but I think it really goes to
you have to be honest with people, yeah.
Well, I think business owners need to be honest with themselves too, and just make sure that they're okay and they have the money to deal with bumps in the road that come along. And this is obviously all ignoring the fact that, as we all know, cannabis is illegal on a federal level. And at any time, and we've seen indications of it to a certain extent through sessions, at any time they have the authority to basically shut the whole thing down, arguably. So that's that could be the content of an episode itself. But,
yeah, that's a whole other show. The signals from the federal government, But
I didn't.
I'm sorry. What was it?
I just quick take on that. I don't think that what Sessions said really had a ton of teeth to it. But like I said, that's a completely different topic.
Yeah, that's a whole other rabbit hole that I will totally get you on the phone for that, because man, heads are spinning. But getting back to this, and we also have to remember that these regulations in California, they're temporary, because the real ones don't go into effect till next year. Is that right? They're like a solidified law.
Well, it depends. So like I said, they're going to have a newer version at the end of spring. Whether or not that's the final version, it's going to depend on whether or not things are brought up that they didn't anticipate. I can tell you some of the big things they're looking at right now is, for example, Public Information Act or requests for distributors' information. So as it is right now, the temporary application, I believe, is requiring distributors to put their information up on the website.
Wow.
And obviously, that's a serious concern given the fact that they're going to be carrying a ton of cash. So that's something that is being addressed to not, I don't think you're ever going to have a situation where someone can't get a hold of that information with a freedom of information request, right? But they at least want to have it that's just not just something you can Google.
They don't, let's not make it too easy.
Right, so that's a huge concern. Also, another concern is, taxes, I mean, if there's any area of these regulations that I'm the least familiar with, it would be the taxes. But long story short, we're de-incentivizing people to get into the regulated market if we're going to nail them with taxes up the wazoo. So at the meeting I was referring to earlier, they've talked about, I think, lowering the excise tax and kind of going from there just to encourage people to get into the regulated market. And the third thing they brought up is the definition of an owner and who needs to be disclosed on the application. As of right now, pretty much anybody with a financial interest has to be disclosed on the application. The concern there is that it's going to kind of discourage people from being involved in the regulated market. So, like I said, this stuff is changing.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you said, it sounds real fluid. It's everyone trying to,
right.
Trying to bring this thing out of prohibition, because it's the first thing to come out of prohibition in 60 years or something like that. But
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and so now going to that point, as far as like who's allowed to get a license or be on the license. Now, can you have a criminal record and get a license out here? Folks, I'm having some technical difficulties. I'm going to have to push pause, take a short break, and figure it out. Hang tight, listen to some music, and we'll be right back.
Avec ta photo dans mes poches, pour souvenir un peu délavé. Mais aujourd'hui, je pense à toi, je voudrais m'en tourner, trouver. Tu t'ennuies, tu tanné, seul au fond de notre carré. Garocher ma pose de métro, mon sac à clous, puis mon marteau. Retourne chez nous, j'en ai ma claque, pour prendre le train pour Passe-Pédiac. À chaque fois, combien c'est chaud, combien c'est doux, serré dans le fond de tes bras. Mon petit bébé, je suis fatigué, avant que le froid ne m'attrape, avant que les grands froids d'hiver, avant que l'amour ne s'échappe. Garocher ma pose de métro, mon sac à clous, puis mon marteau. Retourne chez nous, j'en ai ma claque, pour prendre le train pour Passe-Pédiac.
Brothers and sisters, thank you for letting me take that short break. But we're back with Ryan Kocot from Kocot Law. So, Ryan, we were talking earlier, and we were talking about criminal records. My question was, does a criminal record keep someone from getting a cannabis business license?
So this is a very lawyer answer, but it really does depend. There's a whole section in the regulations that address this, but what I can tell you, which will probably give your listeners more insight, is that I was at a meeting for the California Cannabis Industry Association, and Lori Ajax, the head of the BCC for the state, was speaking at it. And she was very clear that they really want to be inclusive within the industry and that people with prior convictions should definitely apply. I think on another level, the chances that it's going to stop you from obtaining a license, I think depends on the severity of what you were charged and convicted with. There's also, there's ways to address that as well. I think we had spoken about a little bit before the recording went haywire on us, is that, there's misdemeanors and felonies. I think obviously felonies being the more serious of the two, felonies are going to have a larger impact on your ability to get into the industry. but you should speak to whatever attorney represented you, whether it be the public defender or a private attorney, to get an idea if your charge is something that can be reduced to a misdemeanor or even possibly reduced and expunged off your record. I think that's something that people looking to get into this space with prior records should look into prior to putting an application in, because I think it only betters your chance of being successful getting a license.
Right. So, I mean, everybody should just be forthcoming with any kind of record that they may have, just because you never know. Like, because you were talking earlier about, which goes what you were saying about a wobbler charge, that you may be able to get it reduced.
So let's break that down for a second. It's not should. You don't have a choice but to, disclose this stuff. And what I can guarantee you is this: it'll depend on whether or not it'll depend on how serious the conviction was, as far as whether or not it basically keeps you out of the loop as far as getting a license. But what can guarantee you not getting a license is you not disclosing this stuff ahead of time and the state or the locality finding out about it. So there's no question whatsoever. It has to be disclosed. It's not even a question on that end of things. But as far as a wobbler, there's certain crimes that can be charged either as a misdemeanor or a felony. So, for example, if you have a prior DUI, DUIs can be charged either as a felony or a misdemeanor. You should contact your attorney that represented you in the case initially to find out, is this a charge that can be reduced from a felony to a misdemeanor? Because if it is, and you successfully completed your probation without any violations, I think having that reduction go through from a felony to a misdemeanor puts you in a better position to get a license when you do your application.
Wow. So,
I guess, not to cut you off, another thing I would note, a lot of these, the local applications especially, require your fingerprinting and a live scan. So they're going to know about your record. It goes back to what I said earlier. You don't have a choice but to disclose your record, and I can guarantee you won't get a local or a state license if you don't.
So now, do you think that a cannabis charge would hold anybody up? Like a basket, let's say one of these old-time cultivators who got busted 15 years ago, and they want to go legal, but because, I mean, I think they'd have a better chance of getting a cannabis charge just expunged or lowered, just because of the way the laws are.
Well, a lot of
now.
cities are doing that. I've seen in the news today and yesterday that a lot of district attorneys are taking the initiative and reducing charges on their own, actually, without people, I think, having to petition for it. But, I hesitate to give a blanket answer that no, a cannabis charge is not going to keep you out of the loop for licensing. I think, it just depends on the circumstances and the severity of it. Because the reality is that a lot of times people, in a more serious case, aren't just charged with the cannabis charge; they're also charged with possession of a firearm, that's not even just for cannabis charges. Just when you're talking about a more serious felony case, it's typically the case that someone is charged with more than one thing. So I don't want to take the position that, hey, yeah, cannabis, well, you're good to go. You have to look at each individual case to really judge as an attorney whether the reality of getting something reduced or expunged. But it just goes back to what I said earlier. The worst thing that can happen is that they can say no. And I think, based on what I'm hearing from people in the industry, specifically the person that's the head of the state for all this stuff, they're really trying to make an effort to include people in this industry. And I would imagine, especially people that have been prosecuted for crimes related to cannabis, that wouldn't even necessarily be a crime today.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So now I want to mention something that you just said, and that is gun ownership and cannabis. Now I know as far as California, if you're a medical patient for cannabis, you can't own a gun as per federal law. Am I understanding that correct?
Well, I mean, at any given time, and I think we might have talked about this in the initial recording, you're breaking federal law as it is, right?
Right.
To be completely candid with you though, Alex, I am not terribly familiar with the gun restriction. that has not been an area I've really focused on or come across. So I can't really add a lot to the conversation when it comes to that, and I would be bullshitting you if I tried.
Okay, well, let's talk. Let's take the lawyer part out of it. Let's just talk about you and me just talking about gun ownership and being a medical patient. You know, I mean, because when I read that kind of regulation, that seems like the kind of regulation that was written just as a knee-jerk fear reaction. Because, it's not like someone who's taken cannabis is any more dangerous with a firearm than anybody else who's got a prescription for opioids or any other mind-altering drug.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular regulation, but there's definitely a misguided fear, and I think basically what it really boils down to is there's still this perception of associating marijuana with cartels and violence and whatnot. And I think it kind of goes back to the perception conversation we had, that I think a lot of the movement in the industry is going to come down to the perception of it. And I think everybody has a responsibility to do what they can to abide by the law and the regulations so that we move towards a more, across the board positive perception of the cannabis industry. But I think regulations like that are, a direct reflection of a narrow view of cannabis, especially when you're talking about medical cannabis, which, we can go down that rabbit hole, but people have this perception that when you talk about cannabis, it's just about getting high when, we all know there's a lot more to it, especially on the medicinal end of it than that. But I think that's kind of just reflects that stereotypical perception of cannabis.
Yeah, it just seems like something that's still coming out of that reefer madness mentality,
Right, exactly.
All right. Well, Ryan, is there anything you want to mention that I didn't ask you about that maybe you think people should know about cannabis and the law in California?
The thing I guess I would mention is that it's changing on a daily basis and that you've got to really stay on your toes to make sure you're keeping up with the changes. The regulations that were put out on December 7th of this past year were emergency regulations. The state is going to release a more updated, revised version of those same regulations at the end of this year, or at the end of the spring of this year, I think sometime in April probably. When they release those regulations, they're going to have public comment periods where stakeholders in the industry can go out and voice their concerns. It's an opportunity for anybody involved in the industry to point to things that they don't agree with or things that they think are going to cause problems in the long run to the people that are writing the regulations. So I would really encourage people to get out and have their voice heard at those public comment periods when the new regulations, or I should say the revised regulations, come out. Because when they're set in stone, you're stuck with what you got. So you don't want to be in a position where you're kicking yourself that you could have potentially had the law changed based on your feedback. So I guess I would just that would be the last thing I would add to the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. See, everybody stay involved, stay informed, show up to your city council meetings. Come out of the shadows, everybody. Ryan, thanks a lot for coming on the show twice. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody again how to find you, either through on the internet, how people can get a hold of you.
Sure. So I'm probably the most active on Instagram, but I also have Facebook. My tag on that is just my name followed by law. So it's Kocot Law, KOCOT LAW. And then my website is going to be my name followed by law.com. So KOCOTLAW.com. My website guys are actually in the process of combining two websites, but those three areas, as far as my website, Instagram, and Facebook, are probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. But my direct email address is Ryan Kocot Law, RyanKocotLAW@gmail.com.
Well, all right. Yeah, folks, if you need a lawyer, if you're moving out here, if you're thinking of jumping in the game, find a lawyer. Better yet, go find Ryan. All right, Ryan.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem, Ryan. Hang tight, Ryan. Don't go anywhere. Podcast Nation, I'm going to take another short break, and I'll be back.
Well, there you go, folks. If you get a cannabis DUI, keep your mouth shut, get a lawyer, and fight it with science. I need to thank Ryan Kocot again for coming on the show, because that was really cool. I had messed up the last 10 minutes of that interview, and he was cool enough to come on the phone twice with me to finish that up. So, Ryan, thank you very much again, brother. I appreciate your time. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that looks like a show. If you've got any questions or comments, email me. That's inmygrow@gmail.com, or find me on Instagram at inmygrow. If you want to support the show, go to inmygrow.com, and you'll see a little link there that says support the show. That'll take you to our Patreon campaign, and that just helps us pay for equipment, website hosting fees, podcast hosting fees. If you can't help out financially, don't sweat it. Here's what you can do. Just tell 3 people about the show. Very simple, painless. If you want to advertise on the show, or if you want to sponsor the show, same kind of thing. Email me or find me on Instagram. All right, folks, I'm going to get out of here. Everybody have a great day. And remember to grow, learn, and teach.
Oh, yeah. Some people have a dream to get rich. That's what causes the fussing and fighting. Come on, brothers. We don't get to stay united. Oh yes, it's just a little love that we want. It's just a little love that we need. It's just a little love that we want. It's just a little love that we need to keep us alright, to keep us together. Oh yeah, drum up beers. So many people are dying to get to the top. So many people are crashing to reach to the top. So many people are dying to get to the top. So many people just want to reach to the top. Listen, can it race with the clock? Oh no, 'cause you know it's never stop. Alright, drum and bass, so take it easy. Alright, I take it slow. Oh yes, I take it easy. Alright, I take it slow. Oh yes, just a little love that we want. Just a little love that we need. Just a little love that we want. Hey, just a little love that we need to keep us alright. Alright, to keep us together. Oh yeah, keep us together. Alright, keep us alright. Oh yeah, hey. Just a little love that we want. Just a little love that we need. Just a little love that we want. Just a little love that we need to keep us alright. Alright, to keep us together. To keep us together. To keep us together. Alright, to keep us together. Alright, keep us forever. Oh yeah, take it down together. Alright, to keep us together. Alright, just a little love that we want. Just a little love that we need. Just a little bit of love. Just a little love that we want. Keep us alright. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Roots rock reggae in the house tonight.